Okay, so approaching a large-scale environment. Now, as mentioned before, the easiest way to navigate a large-scale environment is big to small. So, what characteristics define the world that you're trying to recreate? From a visual point of view, as we mentioned previously, what type of geology exists, what rocks have formed, how have they gathered, what kind of ground coverage is there, what's the naturally occurring variety. It's best to ask as many questions as you can and understand what it is that you're trying to create. Now, technically, once we have observed what we need to observe, what we want to do is start creating this thing, right? So technically we start with a ground plane, and not every environment needs to be complicated. You don't have to create complicated geometry here. Sometimes a simple bit of noise on a plane might be enough. For anything more advanced, we have some choices. So they can be generated or they can be sculpted. So for most things, I would probably go procedural first and get as much information in as I can. If I really can't hit the look or the style that we need, or that I need, then we can think about sculpting. And it may be that you're more comfortable with sculpting, and that's also fine. Just know that if any changes need to be made, it's more difficult to roll them out, which is why I always prefer to start procedurally. So at this point, I would also drop in some rough lighting. It's important that we get a good read on the forms and the shapes that this lighting starts to create, so we can begin to make some compositional decisions. It also means that we can start to decide where we need to put our effort and what areas we've chosen as the focus and which are the context. I would also set up a look dev scene so I can consistently texture and shade the asset for use within the main scene. So moving on, I would start to build my ground terrain shader. It's usually at this stage that I'll use what we mentioned earlier and try to recreate the reference. It's important to also keep an eye out for weathering effects in the textures and try and make sure that you're doing them justice. This could be water against rocks, or how it's affecting the shoreline, some glacial melt, or the transitions between different surface types like rock and grass. So with assets, when I'm creating assets, again, big to small. And this could be procedural, it could be sculpting, it could be sourcing, or it could be photo scanning. For this workshop, we'll rely on megascans to get what we need. But if you'd rather sculpt or photo scan your own, then please do so if you're comfortable. Now, SpeedTree is still the best tool for trees and foliage, and can also create some nice grass and ivy if you need to. We'll cover these later, but each one should be shaded separately in your look dev scene and then moved into our lighting scene where we can further develop it if we need to. If you aren't confident in creating your own compositions and you're working from a concept, then it's important that you stick as closely as possible for a few reasons. And I've mentioned this briefly, but I just want to talk about this one last time. Firstly, the artist who designed the concept or photograph has done all the hard work, making many compositional choices, so any deference from the image could risk upsetting the balance. Secondly, there's a lot to learn by staying true, and you'll subconsciously be absorbing what makes the image work, as long as you're not taking too many liberties. Lastly, as an environment or lighting artist, it will be your job to match a colour script and match paintovers from leads, art directors, and sometimes directors. And it's important to build up this ability. Actually, it will also be your job to improve on the direction from leads and art directors, because fundamentally, you are the environment artist, so you should be the authority here to some extent. So next up would be scene assembly, taking everything you've built, all the assets and everything you've sourced, and begin to create your scatters and instances, paying close attention to the reference. This could take a lot of different asset types depending on the ecology of the place. We'll cover scattering in depth. This is where Houdini really excels. Now, tools like Mash and Forest Pack are great, but they, in my opinion, have nothing like the power of Houdini for customization and control. Once we have everything within the scene, we can focus on balancing and matching the reference on the image as a whole and refining our lighting. Knowing what you have to do in 3D versus compositing comes with practice. Sometimes it just makes more sense to achieve certain things in compositing rather than fight in the program itself. Finishing the image at this stage would be about adding any volumetrics or fog that we need, and then moving into comp, which is something else that we'll explore in depth later. So that's all here. Thanks guys. I'll see you soon.